Beckn. A lot of you have just started looking into this. So there were a bunch of questions that were about understanding what the protocol is all about, trying to deep dive into the industries or domains that the Beckn protocol is delving into, or understanding the various open network implementations that Beckn protocol is a part of, various national level implementations or networks that you may have heard about, questions around them, and then questions around how do you implement your products using Beckn protocol, and then how you could work with building various implementations on Beckn, and then how do you volunteer with us, so questions around that as well. And there were a bunch of other questions which were either very specific to a particular participant or which were not pertaining to the larger audience in question. So we have tried to cover all of them, and we have tried to keep in mind that each one of you may come from a specific experience or a specific background. So we will make sure to cater to all of the questions that you may have. The first 30 minutes of the call will be about these questions that we have already received. And then the next 30 minutes will be where each of you will get a chance to ask follow-up questions and queries that you may have, and we'll leave the floor open for you to interact with Sujith and Ravi. So with this, let's quickly start with understanding Beckn protocol. Let's take it from there. For all of us who are new to the protocol, let's understand what this is all about. Sujith and Ravi, over to you on this.
Thank you, Shweta. Hello, everyone. Very delighted to see participation from so many of you. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking out your time on a Monday evening, which is not easy for many of us. So thank you so much, and thanks for sharing those questions as Shweta was mentioning. And I was just taking a look at some of them. Very fascinating set of questions. I'm sure we'll have time today to cover most of them, hopefully. But thank you for putting this question. And Shweta, thank you for this incredible effort of putting together this event as a community manager. Kudos to your effort. Very nicely done already. So I think without much ado, what I can do, I know explaining Beckn is going to take a lot of time. And I know that some of you probably want to make most of this 60 minutes that you have with us. So maybe Ravi and I will not go too much into explaining what Beckn is, but set a broad overview, because we do have in our audience who are just getting to know Beckn and understanding Beckn. So maybe a high level overview is what we'll probably attempt to offer. And then we'll use that as some form of a foundation to kind of look at the other sets of questions that we already have. And if there's an opportunity in the second segment of this discussion, maybe even talk about Beckn in a bit more detail. But I think with that, if I were to just explain Beckn, the whole journey and the Beckn itself, it's fundamentally, and it's very important we understand, because some of the questions do allude to Beckn being something else. But it's important to understand that Beckn, at the very essence, is nothing but a collection of specifications which are open sourced, and accessible for all. It's just a specifications. It's just some form of a vocabulary that makes two machines communicate with each other to understand the specific semantics of an order lifecycle. An order lifecycle, whether it's for commerce or for any other sector, till date, if you look at all the machines interoperable specifications that are there, be it in the form of TCP/IP, where two machines can talk to each other in an asynchronous way with packet switching, or let's take a layer of protocol on top of it, HTTP, which is essentially talking about exchanging hypertext, where a browser can probably understand where the web server is and download the content and present it to the user, or an SMTP, which makes two email servers send and exchange emails in a certain format. A Beckn is one such. What Beckn does is add a layer of semantic interoperability on top of it. Now, what is the semantic interoperability and why are we doing this? The semantic interoperability is for two machines to fundamentally understand the whole e-commerce or any economic transaction lifecycle. Today, if I were to go to an e-commerce site, and I'm taking commerce as an example, only as an example. Today, if I were to do commerce as a buyer, I have to go to a certain platform available as a website or an app go there and discover the sellers and their catalogs and place an order. So the whole platform there, I mean, we all know the big platforms and the smaller platforms, but assume there's a platform, a shopping platform, you're going there. And that is where the entire information is organized for you to go through the life cycle as a shopper. For example, I can search for an item, I can find it, I can add it to the cart, I can probably initiate checkout by addressing my delivery details and a whole bunch of things, make a payment, or maybe make the payment towards the end at the time of delivery, and then track my order, see where the order is and when it's getting delivered, and then post delivery. One is the payment if I haven't made the payment already, and then kind of rating for the service, anything which is rateable, the item itself, the delivery itself, or the seller offering that item. I can rate that, or even raise a consumer grievance request or a complaint or things like that. So the entire order life cycle there is something that you do on one site, where the buyer and the seller need to be on the same site, whether it's a retail site or a ride hailing platform or a food delivery site, where the buyer and seller need to be on the same platform. It all happens on that. But with Beckn, as a specifications, we can have a buyer or a consumer on a platform A, not knowing where the sellers are, and still discover those sellers, even if those sellers and providers are not on platform A. The sellers could be on B, C, D, or any site which we don't know yet, any platform that we don't know yet, and yet naturally discover them in the context of shopping, in the context of order lifecycle, and then see if you can find what we're looking for from what the seller is offering from its catalog, and then go through the entire cycle that I just explained, add it to the cart, checkout, pay, etc., etc. So this ability for the buyer and the seller, the consumer and provider, to be on any different platforms and yet discover each other needs an element of semantic interoperability, where the machines can figure out where to look for, what to look for, is it relevant, then how do I fulfill that, how do I execute and fulfill that transaction. That entire sort of vocabulary was missing today on web. This vocabulary is kind of captured inside some of these platforms, which execute this vocabulary as a monolithic proprietary platforms. And obviously, if you have many platforms, the question is, can one platform alone cater to the needs of an entire population, especially the population of India, if you have to take that as an example? We feel that it cannot. But if we were to move away from this whole platform-centric approach to a more protocol-centric semantic interoperability approach, where buyer and their platforms, the sellers and their platforms, could come in great numbers and naturally engage in these transactions, in this order lifecycle, that's what Beckn as a protocol tries to solve. So Beckn is a protocol. It's just a specification. By itself, it does nothing. It's just lying in GitHub if nobody's looking at it. But the platform, the innovators, the tech entrepreneurs with their platforms, people who are wanting to save cost on customer acquisition, people who are want to save cost on order acquisition, who want any user anywhere to discover their catalog or their seller's catalog, or a buyer, if they want to offer a rich experience to the buyer and say, hey, you cannot just order grocery, but also book a ride, also book a hotel stay, also find a learning course nearby, all on my platform. I want to bring that experience onto my platform as a buyer side platform entrepreneur. Now it is possible. It's made easier, significantly easier, by having a Beckn protocol kind of an interface. So Beckn is a protocol. It's not a platform. And by the very explanation that I just gave, it is naturally decentralized, which means there's no intermediary in between the buyer and seller who happen to be on two different platforms. There's nobody in the center trying to orchestrate anything. It's just a decentralized protocol. Yeah, I'll stop here, and I'll probably let Ravi also explain the order lifecycle and how that gets translated into Beckn. With that, Ravi, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Sujith, and so great to see so many people here today. So without further ado, let me quickly jump into the details of the order lifecycle itself. So what we observed when we were actually developing this protocol is that any consumer provider interaction can be unbundled into 4 distinct stages, right? One is the act of discovery, where you're actually trying to search, or where you're trying to browse, or where you're trying to discover certain products, services, right? And sellers, and right. And then the next stage, once the discovery is over, once you have finally viewed the catalog, okay, of which you are trying to search for, then you proceed to the actual act of ordering, which is the second stage of any consumer provider interaction, where you say, this is what I want, okay, and this is what the offers that I have, or this is how I want my order to be delivered, all those things, right? And then finally you make the payment, and then you confirm the order. So that sort of concludes the order stage of that interaction, right? Once the order is placed, okay, the next stage of consumer provider interaction is the actual fulfillment of that order, right? This is the real life handling of the order, where the provider or the producer actually delivers that order or fulfills that order in some way or the other. It's not always delivery. It could also be some sort of service provisioning, like, like an urban club coming and, providing certain cleaning services for you. That's also an order for you, right? That's the actual fulfillment of that order. In this stage, you do various things like, tracking the status of fulfillment, what stage of fulfillment it is, and then you can also update your active order, like, if you want to change the products that you're buying, you want to increase or decrease the quantity. Maybe you also want to change the location of fulfillment, maybe your address, like changing your address or changing the details of your billing, etc. And then you can also cancel an order at that time, right? An active order can also be canceled. So all of this, and then obviously then in orders or in interactions where there is live locomotion that is happening, in those cases you can actually track the order, right? So that sort of concludes the sort of order stage of a consumer provider interaction, where finally once the order is fulfilled, that concludes the order stage of that. And the last stage of an order life cycle is where you rate, or you provide data regarding the reputation of the service provider or the seller over there, right? Where you rate the provider. And then finally, one more interaction that can possibly happen after the completion of an order is the support lifecycle, where you're trying to fetch the details of the customer support from the provider who is servicing your order, right? And those four blocks constitute the I'm sorry guys those four blocks constitute the order life cycle in a Beckn. Now what we observed, that each of these blocks, okay, can be further unbundled into individual APIs. So what we found out, that what we realized after in the last 1 year, is that almost any producer consumer interaction can be unbundled into 10 buyer seller APIs, right? Those APIs are basically search, select, init, confirm, status, update, track, cancel, rating, and support, right? We observe that almost any use case across industries, whether it is mobility or retail or logistics or healthcare. And there was, interestingly, we also recently started a new community on education and skilling, where the discovery of jobs and internships and scholarships and grants, etc., also can be unbundled into these 10 APIs, right? So that sort of summarizes the overall specification of Beckn, where if every participant or if every platform implements these 10 APIs, they become part of this large interoperable network, where all buyer seller or war producer consumer interactions have become standardized, right? That results in the creation of what you call as a public digital infrastructure, where any platform can plug in, and the overall overhead, of actually getting on or actually putting your business online suddenly becomes reduced to a mere few steps of implementing 10 APIs. After that, everything is left to your imagination. You can use those 10 APIs, mix and match, bundle them together, create very diverse integrated experiences. One of the favorite experiences that we usually keep telling people is that one can actually order for a cab, then order for a coffee, and get that coffee delivered on the way to office, right? Using the same set of APIs, provided all these platforms implement. So that sort of opens up the entire ecosystem to a whole new universe of innovation. And that is all possible by implementing Beckn protocol.
That's awesome, Ravi. Thank you for that. And that brings me to a question. You've touched upon this, but could you elaborate, how does Beckn protocol enable decentralization without blockchain?
So do you want to take that, or do I?
Sure. I think Ravi, I think you should answer, but I think quick words. I think Beckn, as I said, is trying to solve for decentralization as a broad purpose. It does not sort of pick a choice of technology, and I think blockchain is a way of a certain sort of a public cryptographic database, a shared database, shared auditable database in some sense, which is immutable and all that. Backend protocol can be applied on blockchain. It can be implemented without the blockchain. It's agnostic to the underlying sort of fabric. So backend is more of a framework. Beckn allows framework by design. It offers decentralization. Now, some of the networks can choose to say that, hey, we will implement this network on blockchain. We have implemented some demos of that on blockchain, but it's not necessary that decentralization can happen only through blockchain. What Beckn does is fundamentally tries to unbundle, as Ravi very eloquently explained, unbundle this idea of buyer and seller being on any node, on any platform, and naturally discover each other and undertake a transaction, right? There is no intermediary, or that this network has no center. Anybody can, it's a P2P kind of a transaction that happens between a buyer platform and a seller platform, and it has its own layers of trust and other elements going into it. And I already see some questions to that. We'll explain that later. But it fundamentally does decentralization by the way of unbundling and introducing interoperability. And it's kind of technology agnostic. It's more of a framework and architecture which can be done on blockchain or otherwise. But fundamentally, it achieves decentralization through unbundling, where the consumer and the provider need not be on the same platform, and there's no central intermediary trying to orchestrate a transaction. Shweta, if that helps, maybe we can, in the interest of time, go to the next question. Or Ravi, if you want to add anything, please feel free to add.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Nothing, Sujith. I mean, very eloquently put. So we can, I think, move to the next question.
Yeah, so that brings me to another question by a participant. So now that what we have to observe is, can the protocol go beyond e-commerce alone?
Yeah, I think we've already seen that. I think Ravi has already mentioned that. Beckn today, in fact, Beckn's first implementation, Beckn originally, in fact, took its birth in mobility or transport. It used to be called Beckn Mobility until we discovered the deeper truth that the same vocabulary seems to be working for a lot of other sectors too, as Ravi just explained. So mobility is definitely a place where Beckn is already live and being implemented. Please do look at openkochi.net, which talks about Kochi Open Mobility Network. Commerce, of course, logistics, we are seeing that already. We're also seeing that adoption in healthcare. So I don't know if you have been following what National Health Authority is doing as part of Ayushman digital health mission, where you have UHI, Unified Health Interface. There's also an open network for healthcare services, decentralization of healthcare services, be it teleconsultation, doctor appointments, diagnosis, etc., or even booking an ambulance. They are using decent protocol like Beckn as the substrate on which they're creating a health taxonomy and calling it decentralized health protocol to implement UHI. So mobility, healthcare, commerce, we are already seeing implementation. I think we are most likely to see this in skilling and learning as well. How do I find a tutor? How do I want to learn something? And you realize that there's a tutor in your neighborhood who was actually teaching, and you could discover that and probably learn it at your own convenience at cheaper price. So learning, job. So that's another area. Agriculture, agri-commerce has got a lot of retail kind of characteristic to it. So that is happening. Some people are even exploring how government to people services could be enabled through Beckn if there are multiple service providers, fragmented sort of service discovery ecosystem. How do we bring Beckn as an interoperable layer for enabling the general order lifecycle execution to happen? So these are some of the sectors we are already seeing. My sense is the underlying language of Beckn is exhaustive but generic, and I think I need to mention the caution that it's generic, it's not specific. So the way the Beckn sort of protocol is designed, it allows for layered configuration. So the Beckn core is generic, fairly exhaustive, but generic. You take a taxonomy of a particular domain like healthcare, retail, or mobility, and make it specific to a domain. And then within that domain, if there's a network, like a Kochi Open Mobility Network or an open network for digital commerce and retail, then you have network level layer of configuration further. So it's a very layered design that enhances the adaptability of the protocol for multiple domains. So there's some level of detail in the design, in the architecture, which allows for its adaptation for multiple sectors and being naturally a good candidate protocol to look at for multiple sectors when it comes to transaction lifecycle. It's a transaction protocol, it's a transaction rail, and it finds relevance in multiple sectors because of this sort of design that is baked into the protocol. Shweta?
Thanks for that, Sujith. And coming to the next question, how does the protocol negate the possibility of open networks being controlled by large players?
Okay, I think probably one of the very few questions that I'll be answering, and I think we should let Ravi always explain more. But I think if you look at the idea of decentralization, it's sort of the antithesis to this whole lone hero concept, right? I think today we have a lone hero sort of a model where everybody is trying to say that I will be the intermediary who will bring service and providers and I will solve the problem, right? Now, that whole monolithic model, that whole edifice fundamentally has a design problem where that one person has to solve for the problem. And if you want to solve for things at population scale, I don't think we should wait for one person in the middle to stand and solve the problem. We should find a way to distribute the ability to solve, right? And that is what a decentralized infrastructure with Beckn protocol tries to solve. And by that very design, given the fact that there is no one person controlling, putting in very simple terms, the buyer and seller side ecosystem, the demand and supply onto one platform, it fundamentally allays the fear of one person trying to take charge. But yes, even if it's a decentralized network, there could be few big platforms coming and saying, I would, even on this network, I will corner the whole market share and things like that because I have better catalogs. Now, again, there, I think there's a little bit of I would say a little bit of a myopic thinking, but I mean, just to take a retail as an example, today, in e-commerce, it's just 6.5 or 7% of the overall retail that happens in India, okay? So the big platforms are probably doing only 6%. Now, if you want to be a market leader in that 6%, fine. But if you're trying to expand the market to 25%, I don't think just one or two platforms are going to cut it, especially in sectors like mobility, grocery, logistics, etc. So that is where I think more participation, especially what we are seeing in some of the big networks like ONDC, some of the young players, probably young players who are doing 0 to 1, who have not done commerce before, jumping into commerce arena because now there is an open protocol and network like ONDC, where I can probably have a level playing field because I just need to get, if I'm a seller side platform, get whoever is my seller ecosystem, bring them on board, and I don't have to fight for demand because I'm naturally discoverable. My sellers are naturally discoverable. Similarly, on the buyer side, I could be a condo management software, or I could be a small cooperative or a citizen service center by Government of India in some rural areas. If I have some access to some captive audience on the demand side, I can still find any catalog that I may not have to acquire, but out there, whether it's from Amazon or a small company or a big company or etc., right? So that ability, that democratization, that democratization of access kind of keeps in check this tendency of somebody taking over. Having said that, should that tendencies happen, that concentration is always a tendency. We kind of, as a mankind, we have seen David's becoming the next Goliaths in some sense. But I think there again, the protocol does allow for some kind of policy enablement. You can bake policies, and that's for up to networks to figure that out. Networks like ONDC, Kochi Open Mobility Network, and other networks to sort of introduce a layer of equal play policies onto the protocol so that you deter such tendencies of concentration. So protocol has built in some of this. I wouldn't say that's sufficient, but it allows for a greater measure and greater way to monitor this on a fundamentally decentralized protocol already. So there are multiple ways at which we're trying to address this, but you never know, things will still go bad. But that's where I think a little bit of a policy injection into the protocol would always help, undermine those tendencies. Yeah.
Thank you, Sujith. That brings me to ONDC. There's a question given by one of the participants. So they're asking, how will ONDC democratize e-commerce in India, especially from a small merchant's perspective?
Yeah, I think some of it is something that Ravi and I have already answered. The fact that ONDC did not choose to be that central operator, right? Like one platform where everybody should come, all the buyers and sellers, all the Kirana stores should happen and all that, whether it's enabled by, blessed by government or otherwise, it chose to adopt a decentralized protocol, like an open source Beckn protocol. And because there's a decentralized protocol, all that ONDC is saying is, listen, there is a protocol which is voluntary, which is free, which is accessible to all. Just find a way to adopt it and help yourself. Help yourself, force multiply your ability to do things online, do business online as a small seller or business seller, and come in, and we will make sure that we have the right amount of infrastructure, whether it's a registry, the gateways, the policy registry, the reputation system, grievance handling through ODR, online dispute resolution systems. That's what ONDC as a network orchestrator or a network facilitator organization is trying to bring, so that the network is reliable. There's some kind of a mutual trust before onboarding. I know the kind of parties who are coming in. There are no nondescript parties coming onto the network, allowing them to enhance the trust of the network such that anybody can become naturally discoverable and participate. Other than that, I don't think ONDC is trying to do anything else other than facilitating this. If I'm a seller, I get to decide on my own terms on how I want to sell, what are my cancellation terms, return terms. It's all up to me. ONDC is not setting those rules. Neither is it setting the rules for the buyer. The fact that I can be on any platform as a buyer, I can be on any seller platform as a seller, it's fundamentally reducing the friction, the barrier, as Ravi said, for me to have a choice. Suddenly a seller, whether it's a local kirana store or a thelawala or a taxi or a delivery boy, I now have choice. If I happen to be on any platform, I'm not compromising my agency, my autonomy. I'll still be discoverable by any user who's on any other platform. That is the democratization of access. We are solving of the opportunity to participate, become discoverable, and do business at your own command. That's the essential democratization ONDC is trying to achieve.
Thanks for that. That definitely helps. Now let's move to the next topic about how Beckn works in various domains, right? So you mentioned Kochi Open Mobility Network. Could you tell us more about the various initiatives that are leveraging Beckn in the mobility space, and also about some of these particular use cases, like how will EV charging work with Beckn protocol?
Ravi, would you like to take that up?
Yeah. So currently, so as we know that there is one live production network called Kochi Open Mobility Network that is where there are multiple platforms who have implemented Beckn protocol for various use cases in mobility. Right now, similarly, I think what we are also currently planning to do is also implement Beckn protocol for to make EV charging infrastructures interoperable across various platforms. So I think there's a specification called the OCPI, Open Charging Point Interface specification, which we are currently mapping to Beckn protocol to allow all the EV charging infrastructures to expose their endpoints and their charging endpoints as APIs, right? Where platforms can actually book slots for actually charging and charging for a specific duration. So that is an effort that is currently underway, which is our next part of integrating the secondary and tertiary mobility sector using Beckn protocol. Otherwise, there are other initiatives that are happening for the mobility domain. Apart from Kochi Open Mobility, we are also looking at doing mobility in other cities in India like Bangalore and Delhi, and probably even around at a nationwide mobility implementation level. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Ravi. I'm also dropping a link to the website of Kochi Open Mobility Network. So in case you're interested to know more about it, please do feel free to go through that link. And you can find out more about the implementation, the journey that KOMN has gone through. All the details are present there. And now coming to the documentation, right? There are questions around how participants can implement. So there was a specific question around where they can find documentation around onboarding or encryption and decryption. For that, there is a particular link that I would also like to share. Please refer to this documentation for your queries around encryption and decryption. You'll find all the registry related information in this particular FAQ document. And also there is another question, same regarding implementation. There is someone wanting to know more about the protocol server. Ravi, could you elaborate about what this protocol server is all about?
Right. So thanks, Sweta. So the protocol server is an open source project which allows any platform who wants to become Beckn enabled or become part of any Beckn enabled network, to sort of reduce the overall implementation overhead of understanding the protocol, understanding the asynchronous nature, and actually, becoming compliant as with the protocol schema, and then finally testing with the other participants, and then finally integrating with a particular network. So the protocol server sort of gives a sort of like a black boxed view into a particular network by just exposing the backend protocol APIs in a way it is easily integratable into any application. So I'm just pasting the link to the protocol server repository on the chat right now. Just give me 1 second, guys. So the protocol server, it's an open source project. It's easy enough to sort of install on your local machines. I'm just pasting. Hope you guys have received this. Yeah, this is an open source project where whenever you install, you can actually take any client application, use the documentation to integrate with this protocol server, and automatically become backend enabled. Right. So it's almost like it presents a uniform backend enabled framework that it's almost like how an Android developer does not need to understand the basics of TCP/IP and all the other lower order protocols in order for him to develop an application on the cloud. So similarly, this protocol server gives that additional abstraction layer, which when installed on your cloud, automatically allows your application to become backend enabled by following a very simple integration guide. The integration guide is found in the wiki section of this overall section. Please feel free to go through it. And if there are any questions related to the implementations and the configuration, kindly post those points on the questions on the discussion forum and the issues forum on the repository.
Ravi, can I just come in here for a moment? I think I just recalled there was a question around data as well. And I thought it'd be important that we address that, because some questions about how does Beckn access data, get data? So I think firstly, I think that question sort of has an inherent assumption that Beckn is some kind of a platform or a storage system. And if you go with what we just explained, Beckn is nothing but a specification, right? And so there's nothing like a Beckn server or anything. It's a specification. The buyer and seller platforms implement Beckn in their servers. So the transaction is always between the buyer app and the seller app in consideration of that transaction. So, okay, I don't think it's a decentralized. So therefore, even the network facilitator organization, let's say an ONDC, for example, does not get access to the data. It's between the buyer app platform and the seller platform. Now, in that context, what the protocol server here, for those who are probably hearing this for the first time, is to sort of help the buyer and seller platforms to hasten their effort to be sort of compliant with the protocol and join networks like ONDC, to make it easy. Instead of learning from the first principles, the whole protocol specifications, there was an idea that what if Beckn as a specification in the form of APIs are available as part of an SDK or some kind of a plug and play solution, which somebody else would have been building, and offering it as a solution to the buyer and seller platforms to quickly implement Beckn specifications and join networks. That's where the protocol server idea came in. It could be an SDK, it could be a widget, whatever, to kind of make the community imagine. Ravi just proposed an open source design and implementation of a protocol server. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same design or the same protocol server. Anybody can build a protocol server if they understand Beckn well. But just to make people imagine how this can be done is where Ravi has put together this whole protocol server as an open source reference. It need not be the best, it may not be the worst, but definitely other designs are also possible for somebody who definitely wants, hey, I need something to get my platform up and running on networks like ONDC, Kochi Open Mobility. They can probably look at protocol server, which implements the Beckn specifications in some form. Yeah. With that, back to you, Shweta. Thank you.
Yeah. On that same note, Sujith, the participants are asking, how do we register as a seller or a buyer on open networks like ONDC? So would like to open that question up.
Yeah, no, I can give you the general architecture. I won't be a spokesperson for ONDC on this call. ONDC would have its own. I mean, I'll take ONDC as an example. But I think if you look at any network which is implementing Beckn protocol, there's a concept of an open registry. Okay, the network facilitator organization is sort of implementing the registry. Registry could be a simple flat file implemented on a server. It could even be a blockchain. It could be anything. Okay, based on what the network orchestrator is assuming is a form of implementation. But that registry it's where you register your platform, sort of a telephone book where you register where you are located at or what is your number. That is where the registry here, in case of open network, you register your endpoint, your API endpoint, where you're going to receive all the API requests for search and subsequent transaction APIs, right? That's an endpoint. Now, as part of that, so basically any network facilitator organization like ONDC would say, hey, why don't we will onboard your platform onto this and enlist you in that registry. Now, as part of that, there could be some conditions which could be based on rules and policies of that network, or there could be some technical requirements like, hey, there is a subscription model for you to register. Basically, we are looking at every transaction to be sort of encrypted and dual digitally signed. So every confirm order is actually like a micro contract. So as part of registration, you're expected to kind of do some kind of a key registration and all that as part of encryption and a bunch of all things that go into it. So there's an onboarding steps that typically happens along with any network specific rules and conditions. For example, if you're joining a network like ONDC in India, as a seller platform, you need to be probably registered in India, have a GSTN and things like those. So those are some of the other conditions the network may put from a statutory rules point of view. But others from a technology point of view, there's a way to register onto the network. And probably there could even be a certification process. Now that your claim that you have implemented the protocol well, okay, because given it's a decentralized network, every node adds to the health or adds to the ill health of the network, right? So we make sure that every node on the network is working properly. And that is where they may probably put some certification norms in times to come, saying that, hey, why don't you get yourself certified by a third party who also understands Beckn protocol and sort of says that, hey, you implemented it well for the purpose of ONDC, for the purpose of mobility, etc. So those could be some of the things that will happen in future. What is the current position in ONDC or any such network is something that I would request the audience to reach out to ONDC team and other teams directly to find out. But this would typically what a registration process look like.
Thank you, Sujith. Then coming to the rest of the questions, there were questions around how to volunteer with Beckn. Is there a working group trying to implement Beckn protocol for different use cases? If I'm a web developer, how can I contribute to the various open network implementations of Beckn? So for that, what we'd like to say is we all are volunteers with Beckn. So we have a volunteering community called Beckn Open Collective, which I'm sure most of you are already a part of. But in case you're not, please make it a point to join Beckn Open Collective right away. The link is in the chat for each one of you to join. Within the Discord server, a lot of questions are already answered for you whenever you're stuck with any implementation. We keep conducting sessions like the AMA session right now for helping you out with any of the queries that you may have. And each one of us try to do our bit as a volunteer within Beckn Open Collective to contribute whatever little we can to the various open network implementations. So do join Beckn Open Collective. I think those were the broad questions that we already had. With that, if that's okay, I think we can open the floor. I see that Kumar has been raising his hands. If we could take the question that he had, I think we could start there. 1 minute. Yes, Kumar, I think you'll be able to unmute yourself now and ask your question.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much for this excellent presentation. And if everything goes well, 10 years from now, the world will thank you for protecting it from digital colonization. So thank you, and hope the best. So I have a couple of questions. One is I'm a little bit worried in the sense that what prevents somebody from creating their own network? I'm going to make a pseudonym, Amazon Open Network for Digital Commerce, and keep their own registries. How do we protect it from happening? That is question one, or part one, whatever you want to call it. Part two is, if I want to, and I really like, by the way, it's ingenious, the idea of decoupling and interoperability is beautiful. One thing, and I come from financial industry, so I have the order lifecycle pretty well in my brain. One question I have is sometimes the order lifecycle might extend well beyond, like I want to hold the order in some place and so on. And there are two ways to do it. One, I can override your later parts, post-processing or post-fulfillment, I guess you call it, into more APIs, which probably Beckn has already pre-designed APIs, or stitch it with another network, which would allow me to hold the order like gold, etc. There are a couple of different ways to do it. What would be a recommendation in that scenario?
I think the second part is little nuanced. Sorry, I would not put my brain onto responding that. I think Ravi is the best person to answer that. But maybe if I can pick the first question, I think should we be worried? When are we worried? Okay, I think first, I think the facts. It's an open source protocol, right? So anybody, as you Kumar just pointed out, anybody can technically take this protocol and implement an open network. And I don't think we should probably stop anybody from implementing open networks. Okay, because it's kind of saying that, are you saying that internet only one organization on internet can operate internet, right? I think it's fundamental or essential of open source and basic access to anything which is having digital autonomy in some place. But I think you're making an important point. I think your worry is not about what somebody does it. Your worry is about, even if somebody does it mislead the larger population of buyers and sellers to be some kind of a fake sort of a network where people are placing orders and nothing is happening. There are fly-by-night operators. So I think if I were to break your concern into two, one is the liberty and autonomy for everybody to use an open protocol and open network. That's important. But second is, does it affect the welfare of the larger community? And that's where I think trust becomes an important question. I think those networks which can convey trust not just to the network participants, the platforms, but to their users, the buyers and sellers, the larger community, civil society, buyers and sellers, all of them, those are the networks which will become sustainable. Even if you look at internet had multiple such competing protocols and networks at some point in time, but over a period of time, HTTP came in, there was some kind of a structure through IETF, and everybody said, okay, this is the internet I would like to join. The other internet sort of vanished away. But I think that point about trust, okay, if today on commerce in India, if ONTC is able to demonstrate that trust, we will kind of not just protect the interest of the participants, but also of your users. The people are actually spending money. People are actually generating a commercial liability of putting money and buying something. Their welfare, their trust, and therefore the trust of participants is important. That's where we need somebody who's kind of recognizes the law of the land, understands the underlying welfare, consumer interest, and seller interest protection policies enabling for that gives that confidence for the buyers and seller population to come and participate. Otherwise, even if it is done by government, nobody's going to adopt, is my sense, because if it doesn't offer this trust. If you look at the e-commerce growth in India itself from beginning till now, most of the early transactions are only cash on delivery because they did not trust the seller, no matter who is presenting the seller to me, right? But over a period of time, people got a bit more comfortable. I think with ONDC or any other such networks, some agency who's able to give that trust will probably survive and sustain more than other open networks which fail to offer the trust. So it's not about not letting them do it. It's about who does it with the right sort of trust. And sometimes, government with its ability to convey and put policies and regulations in place can offer that trust. And that's where I think networks like ONDC can prefer. But as a protocol, I think we should keep it open. What if there's a small little community which is probably not getting addressed by formal networks? Why can't they create an open network? Maybe they can. You never know. So I think we should probably let that choice to be there, but trust needs to work differently in those areas. To the next question, Ravi. Sorry, I've kept keeping my answers long. I'll try to keep it as deep as possible.
So Kumar, would you be so kind enough to just also repeat your question so that we can just make sure that you understood you correctly?
Sometimes you have 4 or 5 parts, right? Discover, order management, state management, whatever you want to call it. Then fulfill the order, post fulfillment, and maybe one thing I forgot in the middle, but the each one of them have predefined APIs, like 10 of them you already mentioned. But in some domains, I work in the financial industry, like for example, post-fulfillment could be managing with regulatory agencies, or sometimes when you fulfill the flow of work could be like, I want to get the object, but I don't want to get it to my address. I want to go somewhere else and stay there, like gold or a diamond in a locker or a hazardous material in a safe place until my factory is open, ... There are a couple of different ways in which I can see it, like insert more meaning into the APIs you defined so carefully, which I don't know is a good idea, or create a new network for holders network or something else and stitch the transaction cross network, in which case do you have these domain network servers are equivalent of that your protocol servers will do for multiple domains. That is where it's a slightly involved question. I'm okay to take it.
Got it. So let me try and break this down a little bit. I think this is a slightly longer question. I'll try to see if I can answer this in parts, right? The first question is, there are from what I understood, there are multiple domains out there with very varied use cases, varied data points, information, right? How can all of that somehow get sort of unbundled into these 10 interactions, right? So from here, I would like to sort of sort of paint a picture of what is currently happening, right, in the real world, right? Let's take the case of ONDC, right? So there is a set of transaction APIs, right? And I'm just underlining the word transaction over here because that sort of abstracts away just all the core in data points, or what is the fundamental data that is required for you to create a transaction, which means to create a confirmed order, right? Everything else over and above, like, could be registration, could be onboarding, could be fetching policies, could be fetching any sort of accessing some sort of registry, or it could be as like KYC or anything, all those uh, additional interactions that happen, right, that add to the overall trust or the reliability or the efficiency of a particular network. All of those get bundled into a separate set of APIs which are very specific to that network, right? For example, ONDC has a bunch of policy APIs and an onboarding API that is very specific to ONDC. Beckn protocol does not have anything to do with them. They're just about identifying a bunch of items on a catalog, ordering them, fetching the terms of service, and then actually placing that order, right? I want to now add to a second thing. How does various types of orders sort of get what do you say, represented, right? So what we have done is Beckn protocol is sufficiently abstracted. So what we have noticed is that I mean, we have stress tested the protocol across various use cases and across various sectors. Till now, it seems as if almost every single use case that we have encountered, every single order policy, whether it is whether it is cash on delivery, whether it is pay as you go, or whether it's saying okay, buy now, pay later, or that's just the payment use cases. It would also be don't deliver at my place, deliver at somebody else's place. This is where you need to pick up. This is where you need to drop. This is where you need to stop along the way, pick up items from multiple places, and then do like a single pickup, single drop, like a multi pickup, single drop, single pickup, multi drop, and multi pickup, multi drop, right? All those use cases are sort of baked into the architecture of the protocol. So that sort of allows a much wider set of interactions to be implemented using Beckn. So that's something which we had done when we were designing the protocol. We were making sure we crafted a strong set of design principles which were centered around interoperability, abstraction, and optimal equivalence, and and try to extract only what is required to create a transaction. Then we realized it looks like all commerce, it looks like all buyer seller interactions seem to be the same, right? And everything outside of that, right? For example, when I'm buying a TV, I don't need to mention, I don't need, when I'm actually telling the when I'm actually asking whether you have a TV in your showroom. Let's look at the real life interaction between me when I walk into a showroom, right? I say, hey, do you have a Samsung TV? That guy shows me a TV. Then I ask him, what are its specifications, right? I am still discovering them, right? But once I'm ordering, I don't say I want a Samsung TV with 85-inch display with this much amount of RAM, with this much amount of memory, this is this much amount of features. I don't say all of that. All of that gets moved out of the transaction protocol, and all of them are available as separate APIs, separate policies, separate supported data sets that are specific to the set use cases and the network. So that's how we visualize Beckn protocol and the implementations of Beckn protocol, not just as one layer, but as two layers. One which is very focused, domain agnostic, sector agnostic, which can cater to any transaction, and then a set of use case specific or a network specific API that is specific to the region or the use case or the domain that where you are present in. Hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. I mean, we have some details, but I want to leave the mic for others. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Kumar. I think we should also pick up some questions from the chat. And there's one interesting two-part question by Akash Shah. He asks, what is the incentive here for BAP? How do they make money? And from the BPP side, how can a BPP choose to not be discoverable on a certain BAP?
Great questions. I think on the BAP side, the incentive is okay. So if you're a BAP, I think there's a fundamental question as to if you've taken that, if you have acknowledged you are a BAP, which is a buyer side platform, you're assuming that you cater to or intend to cater to some form of buyer, some form of consumer base that you do, and therefore you have their interest and their context in mind. Now, as a BAP, you may want to offer them the best experience, the best collection of catalogs, assortments, whichever sector you're operating in, whether it's retail commerce, mobility, food delivery, healthcare, etc. So if you want to offer them good amount of choices, a wide array of choices than what you individually can assemble, and on not just get wider array of choices, but also stitch a unique experience that is so unique and USP to your platform. Like the example that Ravi mentioned, hey, maybe a ride-hailing company can give a ride, maybe a coffee shop can give you a coffee, but I can give you coffee in a ride where the delivery address for the coffee is a moving car. That's an experience I can give. I can give the choice of coffee and ride on my platform and give it with a nice experience, right? So that if you want to offer such enriched experiences and wide array of choices, you should consider being a BAP. Now, if you also want to say that, okay, what is in it for me as a BAP while I'm offering experiences? One, of course, I'm sure consumers are willing to pay for whatever unique services you're offering. I would pay for somebody who's offering a coffee in a ride, maybe I pay a bit more. But on the other side, given that you're helping the sellers also receive orders because of your experience, you're helping that buyer, the taxi guy get a ride, the coffee guy get an order. Since you're helping them getting an order, in some networks, it is possible that as a BAP, you can actually ask them, hey, I got you 200 rupees of business and 800 rupees of ride. Can I keep some amount of it as my finder's fee because I helped you find the order? So some of the networks like ONDC may introduce policies like, as a BAP, as a finder of the order, because the customers are able to find them and place an order, you can ask for some money that you can charge, provided there is some commercial and other policies governing that. So that's another monetary incentive. You can keep your consumers happy. You can retain your consumers. You can probably charge a premium. In addition, you may have a possibility of probably asking for a little as a finder's fee. Of course, you cannot be trying to that big guy asking for like pound of flesh of 20-30%, but whatever is a normal. Here, think of scale. With higher scale, what can you do? I think that's an incentive for BAP to look at. Shweta, was there another question other than this?
Yes. So if a BPP doesn't want to be discovered by a particular BAP.
Yeah. So I think fundamentally, if you look at the whole protocol, somewhere it puts sellers' autonomy for the first time in the forefront, right? I'm saying the seller has the luxury of being discoverable. Okay. He can be discoverable, but the choice whether to respond or not is with the seller. So if there's a search request coming, I can choose not to respond. That's stage one. I chose to respond to the search, but I don't want to entertain the order. You can still do that. If somebody says on confirm call, you cannot return an on confirm call. You can abandon. Okay. So you can have a choice to engage, disengage, not engage, right? Those are the choices you have. So you're not obligated to respond. Okay. But okay, of course, at some point, I'm sure when you ask this question, you're mindful of the fact that they could be competitors who may put up their hands and say, I will respond and all that. So I'm assuming you're mindful of that. It is true whether you're an open network or outside, right? You don't want to cater to certain customers, but others may cater to it. But that possibility, that autonomy, that choice is with the seller app or the BPP in case of BPP in protocol language. Yeah.
Yes, thanks for that, Sujith. I think there are two questions that we usually get when we talk about open network.
Yeah, just for the audience, I think some of the early questions from Pushkaraj, Abhishek,
to point that.
I've responded to some of them. If you think there are any counter questions on that, please free to add. But can we move to the other questions too?
Yeah, they've pointed out the trust issue and the customer quality of service. So in case you want to elaborate on how Beckn assures trust and quality of service.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I think the fun, I see where the question, I think if I were to kind of read the mind of the person asking the question, it is counterintuitive. Trust and customer quality is sort of, Beckn is very counterintuitive that way, right? Hey, everything is centralized, so there's one person I can catch hold of her, right? If the seller is bad, I can go complain to the intermediary, the aggregator. So it's very counterintuitive. Therefore, if it is fully decentralized, how do I take care of this? So that's where as a protocol, as a transaction protocol, it allows you to create a network level reputation system, which is not particular to any particular platform, but it's common to the whole network. For example, if I'm a seller A, I gave you an extremely bad product. You are for mobile phones and I send you a box of bricks. You gave me a bad rating. I can leave that platform, start afresh from somebody and continue to sell bags of bricks. In case of a protocol, that sellers has a rating at a network level, not at the platform level. Okay, assuming there's some way to sort of ID the seller, the rating 6. It's also an advantage to the seller, because if the seller is doing exceptionally well, I'm getting, let's say, 4.9 on all my rides or all my retail searches. But when I, for some reason, don't want to stay with this platform, I want to move to the other platform, I'll end up starting from 0. I lost my credentials because I chose to exit from the platform. But with a reputation system, my ratings are interoperable, so I can carry that ratings to the next platform and not start from 0. So reputation systems will eventually, and that's exactly what even these monolithic platforms do. What are they saying? They're giving you ratings for you, and then the customer reviews and all that for you to read and pass the judgment that, okay, I think this seller's quality is okay, or he can fulfill the promise. Pretty much what it can happen at a network level. In fact, it could be better because it's agnostic to any particular platform. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Sujith. So Giriraj had a question about whether what is the fastest way for participants to create an open network using Beckn? Is there a step-by-step guide, or could you walk him through the process of starting an open network?
Ravi?
Yeah, sure. So I think given that we are almost out of time, I want to just quickly sort of present one slide which I have, okay, which sort of talks about the core infrastructure of Beckn, right? If you want to just simply understand how Beckn works, there are 4 actors that you need to implement, right? You need to implement a Beckn application platform. You need to implement a Beckn provider platform. You need to set up a Beckn gateway and Beckn registry, right? So the blue boxes that you see are the 2 transacting entities, right? One which is facing the consumer side, one which is facing the business side, right? And the 2 black rectangles are the rails that offer discoverability and trust, right? So there are open source reference applications that are available on the Beckn GitHub account for both for reference for a BAP, for a BPP, and a gateway and a registry, right? And what you need to do is once you install these platforms on your local environment or your development environment, all you need to do is register the endpoints of all of the Beckn application platform, the provider platform, and the gateway onto the registry, and that's it. You have a prototype running network on your local system. That's all you need to do. Now, if in case you have an existing platform that you want to also make part of this small network, you can take the help of the protocol server, integrate it with and register that endpoint onto the network registry, and automatically you are Beckn enabled. So that's the sort of instruction manual for setting up a Beckn enabled prototype network in a snapshot, right? For more details, feel free to just ping me on Discord. I would be happy to answer more detailed questions on the same. Hope that answered your questions, Giri.
Thank you, Ravi. And I think with that, we have come to the end of this AMA session. There have been so many questions that have been asked by each one of you. Thank you so much for this participation. And lastly, there is one question about lastly, there is a question about joining the ONDC Slack or Discord channel as well. Would just like to mention that you can always drop an email to team@ondc.org. I'll drop the link to the email here. They will they'll talk to you, and based on your implementation, they will add you to the relevant Slack or Discord channel. So please do that. Thank you so much, everyone, for all the queries that you've come with. Thank you for joining. Thank you so much for your time. And Sujith and Ravi, thank you so much for patiently answering all of these questions for all of us volunteers here. Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you, Shweta. I think thank you for the patience from the audience side, personally on my behalf. I think we could have probably kept our answers crisper, but this is we're not used to doing this every time. We'll get better as we do this often, but thank you so much for your patience. Shweta, may I also request you to copy all these questions and responses and probably move them to Beckn Open Collective so that we are persisting these question answers somewhere. And some of the unanswered questions, we should give the answers there. So for those who think that questions are not answered, please do watch out for Beckn Open Collective channel in Beckn Open Collective Discord server, where some of these questions will be answered. And feel free to continue to ask more questions, and we'll try to answer them as possible. But thank you so much otherwise for joining. Thank you.
We'll try to move all of the answers to GitHub discussions on the Beckn protocol, whatever which is very specific to the protocol. We'll move all those questions to the GitHub discussion. So please watch out for those topics and threads so that we can have a deeper dive into each of those questions individually. But until then, thanks a lot, guys. Super happy to be here and super happy to answer all the questions. Feel free to post your questions. Happy to answer all of them. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Great effort, Shweta. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.